Hi everyone, my name is Amanda Johnson, and this is my presentation that on the scholarly articles that I've been reviewing this semester. I'm looking at employee retention among higher education staff. So just to get into things here, just considering that higher education staff are essential to institutional success, higher education staff are able to support functions like recruitment, financial aid, housing, student services, things like enrollment management, the retention efforts, and just campus life initiatives. So strong staffing is critical for the effective operations and the success of college students. But retention of staff is becoming a growing concern. So the Coupa report from 2023 and 2025 showed that over 50% of staff reported being somewhat likely to leave their roles. So that's why I'm looking into, what are those factors that are influencing staff retention in higher education? Areas that have come up are organizational culture, onboarding experiences, job satisfaction, and workforce trends. So looking at who is affected, well, obviously college students can be affected by this because if they don't have the staff support to kind of help them through their college journey, then they're going to be struggling there as well. Other staff members also are affected by this because of large amounts of turnover that happen within departments. Staff members are left to either pick up the slack and kind of take on other colleagues' job duties. They're kind of left to figure things out, and it just kind of disrupts just the efficient and effective flow of just day-to-day job duties. Supervisors and also those in leadership roles are also affected by this. Again, it leads to having to hire someone new and train someone new and that sort of thing. And so there are a lot of effects that happen to the issue of staff turnover and staff end up leaving their roles. So why do I care about this? So in my 8 years that I've worked in higher education, I have definitely seen the retention issues that happen among staff members. I've been in departments where there's just been a lot of turnover, whether it be just, colleagues that I worked side by side with or direct supervisors that I've had that have left their role and someone else came in and someone else left and someone else came in after them as well. And so I have definitely seen the issue of retention just in my time in higher education. There's always going to be a variety of reasons why individuals are going to choose to leave their jobs, but I do think that leaders in higher education, there's some steps that they can take just to improve the experiences that employees are having, and that's going to help retain people that they've already recruited. So what are some of the trends here? Major themes or patterns that arose from the articles that I reviewed are things like leadership and support, organizational culture, job satisfaction, career development, and then onboarding and orientation. So all of these things are factors that are influencing employee retention. Other key findings here, just to elaborate a little bit more on that. So employee retention is going to be influenced by multiple organizational factors. Studies are showing that it's not just not making enough money. It's not the salary issue alone. There are other things involved with that. So leadership behaviors that consistently shape employee engagement and commitment. That's a big one because, yeah, how employees feel like they're being treated or supported by their leaders is going to affect whether or not they want to stay engaged with or committed to the role that they're in. And then also organizational culture and psychological safety can strengthen retention as well. And then job satisfaction is also closely linked to the organizational loyalty. And then lastly, we have the effective onboarding and opportunities professional development, which is going to improve the long-term retention. So just to dig a little bit deeper into what the studies are showing in terms of organizational culture and the work environment. So findings are showing a strong link between organizational culture and retention. Alston and Rahman, 2023, they found that negative leadership styles or the idea of this power culture is going to reduce retention. So overall, employees tend to value recognition, career development opportunities, and just fair treatment. NADU and other researchers in a 2019 study examined the psychological contracts and found that even with high satisfaction, there were hidden frustrations and disengagement that existed. So, kind of the takeaway here is that culture and leadership directly shape whether employees are going to stay or leave their jobs. Looking at onboarding and support, some of the findings showed that a lack of structured onboarding is going to lead to confusion, having a harder time adjusting to the role and understanding what the scope of their role is. This is from a study from Houston and other researchers. It's a study that they did in Malaysia. So there were clear expectations and strong support systems, and those tend to lead to smoother transitions. Poor onboarding is linked to early turnover, like within the first 3 years, their studies showed that those staff members left their job. This study by King, Road, and Wilson was a study done in the UK with using qualitative interviews. So those researchers found that insufficient orientation and unclear expectations made it difficult for employees to transition into their roles. 5 out of their 30 participants ended up leaving the institution within 3 years. So, kind of a takeaway here is that first impressions matter. So, that early support that happens through the onboarding and orientation time is going to be what helps drive the long-term retention of staff. Looking at job satisfaction and just overall working conditions, some of the key drivers of retention are going to be compensation. In one of these studies, it was the strongest factor. Having that work-life balance, good positive relationships with colleagues and supervisors, and then having opportunities for growth as well. So a contrast here was that high passion for work did not necessarily mean that staff are immune to burnout or dissatisfaction. In a 2021 study by Welch and Brantmeyer, they identified that supportive management, work-life balance, and then fair compensation are those key motivators. They also noticed that the absence of those factors could push employees to leave. And then a study by Zromek and Wolniak, it found that while many academic researchers reported high job satisfaction and passion, dissatisfaction was linked to heavy administrative workloads and just overall poor working conditions. So a takeaway here is that measuring satisfaction can be complex, but because multiple factors influence satisfaction. So when those key needs aren't met, employees are more likely to leave. Looking at other turnover trends and then workforce patterns, some of those key findings are that there was a higher turnover among younger employees in the 20 to 35-year-old age. Fixed term or research-based roles also had higher turnover. And then some of the studies found that traditional factors like pay or just job satisfaction don't fully explain the turnover issue. So they suggest influence of leadership, culture, and the external job market as well. Cunningham and Durasamy found that those common variables like job satisfaction and pay were not always strong predictors of turnover intentions. That's where the other factors may come into play, and they identified that. And then a study by Gandy and his colleagues where they analyzed institutional data from 2,500 employees. They found that turnover rates were higher in those younger employees and those that were in the fixed or research-based roles. So again, turnover is complex. The data shows the patterns, but not always shows the clear causes as to why. Looking at tensions and contradictions, so where does the research tend to differ? Things like compensation versus organizational factors. Some of the studies did identify compensation as a major predictor, but others did not. They looked at more of the organizational support factors, and those tended to outweigh the salary. Those were in studies by Vuong et al. And then Walsh and Brandmeier. Looking at the global context, most of the studies were conducted outside of the United States, so questions remain about whether the findings transfer directly to United States higher education institutions or not. And then individual and versus organizational responsibilities. Some of the researchers emphasized employee engagement and psychological contracts, but others looked at the leadership practices, the organizational culture, and then the institutional practices or policies. What are the gaps in the literature? Most of the studies do tend to focus on faculty or academic and teaching staff, looking at research administrators. There's not a lot of studies that do focus on just overall professional staff, the administrative staff, student affairs staff, or academic support staff in higher education. Methodological gaps. There's a heavy reliance on the cross-sectional surveys. There's few qualitative studies on this issue, and then there are limited mixed method research studies as well, and few longitudinal studies. So the methods that were in the studies that I looked at, 7 of them used quantitative surveys, 2 of them used qualitative interviews, and then 1 was a mixed method study. So looking more closely at those studies, so the ones that used quantitative methods, again, those are looking at the relationships among variables, identifying predictors of retention, testing hypotheses, and then analyzing large employee populations. So examples of that would be looking at organizational culture to see the effect on retention, looking at job satisfaction to see how it influences loyalty, psychological contracts to see how they impact employee engagement. The qualitative methods are looking to understand the experiences, to explore organizational transitions, still looking to test hypotheses and capture those perceptions and challenges that were experienced. So looking at those examples, looking at the staff members' experiences during induction or orientation or onboarding and what that process was like for them, how their transition into the academia world looked like, what that adjustment looked like as well. And then as far as the mixed methods, we're combining the statistical trends with those actual perspectives that they had to strengthen the findings through triangulation, explaining not only what is happening, but the why. The study by Welch and Brantmeyer looked at the research administrators' retention and their motivations. So what are some key features that we had here? Features like the participants. Common pattern was that participants were faculty, academic staff, research administrators, or professional staff. Sample sizes ranged from 30 to 760 participants. Research settings, kind of all over. We had universities in the United States, the UK, South Africa, Malaysia, Poland, Vietnam, and the Middle East. The data collection mostly was online surveys. There were interviews as well, and then institutional HR records were pulled. As far as the analysis, they used descriptive statistics, regression, SEM, mediation analysis, and thematic analysis. Just looking into some of the critiques, the limitations due to the methods that were used. Most studies relied on the cross-sectional surveys, which did make it difficult to determine those cause and effect relationships. There was a heavy use of self-reported questionnaires. Several of the qualitative studies had small sample sizes, which limited the generalizability. Few of those studies followed them over time, so you don't really get the longitudinal evidence of that. And then theoretical and representation gaps looked at how most studies are focused on organizational behavior theories, giving limited attention to equity, power, or institutional culture. And looking at those QRPs, there was nothing that was reported or stood out as far as like clear misconduct, but there were some situations that could create those opportunities for questionable research practices. Things like overinterpreting the correlation as causal relationships, selective reporting of statistically significant findings, or sometimes maybe underreporting non-significant results. And then there's limited discussion of negative or contradictory findings. What are those practical limitations? So many of those recommendations assume that institutions have funding and sufficient funding and staffing, but that may not be the case. Organizational change is also often more complex than research models suggest that it is. International findings also may not transfer directly to US context for institutions here in the United States. And then translating that research into institutional practice requires a leadership commitment and organizational resources to do that. And then just overall takeaways and just kind of wrapping things up here. So as the studies have shown, staff retention does remain a significant challenge in higher education. There's no one single factor to explain turnover or retention rates. There's multiple elements, reasons, or factors that could be at play. But this is where institutions and leaders in higher education should be able to better prioritize stronger onboarding practices, just a more effective practices that are going to help employees know what their job is and be able to feel committed to that. Having supportive leadership and culture, and then also having competitive compensation and opportunities for growth. Those seem to be the things that could have a positive impact on the retention of staff. And so, kind of the key takeaway here is that improving staff experiences will result in stronger institutions overall. And then here are my references. Thank you.